Pakistan, which has been labeled as a terrorism-producing country.
Pakistan and others have to stop the export of terrorism into India.
Effectiveness of these border security and immigration measures in securing the homeland.
Human traffickers who threatened the security of people within the United States.
How do you assess the current threat of Islamist terrorism and the effectiveness of current strategies to combat it?
Well, I think the threat remains very high. Well, what happened in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelensky was a great disaster for Ukraine and really for Western unity against all of the issues in the Middle East. If Israel goes after Iran's nuclear weapons program, trade wars don't make anybody better off. The history is that trade wars make everybody worse off.
Hello all, I am Hriday Raval and you are watching Bharat News. Today, we will be dwelling into the most critical issues, starting from the national security of US, to Middle East crisis, to Russia-Ukraine war, to China's influence. And today, to discuss these vistas, we have Ambassador John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to the US. So not wasting much time, let's welcome Ambassador Bolton to the stage. Hello, sir. Welcome to Bharat News.
Glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to have you. So, sir, beginning with the national security and border control, President Trump declared this age as the golden age of America. He also declared the national energy emergency. He also declared the national emergency on the southern border with ICE deporting illegal immigrants. He also labeled drug cartels as the foreign terrorist organization and also advocated for their execution. He also listed 41 countries where there are restrictions to travel to US. How do you assess the effectiveness of these border security and immigration measures in securing the homeland, considering both the stated intentions and the observed outcomes regarding illegal immigrants and drug trafficking?
Well, as you say, Trump has taken a significant number of steps, at least at the rhetorical level, in declaring national emergencies and issuing executive orders. It remains to be seen exactly how much of this will be carried through. Certainly, he received a lot of support in the election on the basis of the argument that we should close the border to illegal immigrants, drug traffickers, and others, human traffickers who threatened the security of people within the United States. And I think the deterrent effect we've seen in just 2 months in terms of reducing the flow, certainly of illegal immigrants across the border, has been significant. Now, how to deal with the drug traffickers and others is a harder question, and how to get rid of criminals in this country who are illegally in the country to begin with, but who have committed other crimes through being agents for the drug cartels or whatever, is more complicated. So it's hard at this early stage to give Trump a grade on this. But I think from the perspective of most Americans, trying to reduce the threat that we see from a lack of control of our borders is something that Trump gets high marks on, as distinguished from some of the other things he's doing, like tariffs and his policy in Ukraine. But on the border, I think this is something that he has made this one of his issues from the very beginning of his campaigns back in 2015 and 16, and that continues today.
Definitely. So we will be coming back to the tariff wars and everything, but we hope that the US border will be secure soon. So, sir, talking about the policies and reforms, what are your thoughts on the policies and reforms taken by the President Trump? This includes his proposal to merge the Department of Energy with the Department of Interior, to close FEMA. He discontinued the Green New Deal, citing its impact on the automotive industries. He also passed an administration of taking the school back to the state authorities. Also, he created a new department, DOGE, headed by Elon Musk. He also ordered to remove transgenders from the sports, and he also ordered the reinstatement of military personnel who refused to take COVID vaccine. So how do you view these policies and reforms, particularly in light of their potential impact on government efficiency, economic growth, and national preparedness?
Well, as you say, once again, he's undertaken a lot of steps in a very short period of time. But much of what you said, I'll leave the vaccine question out for a minute. are things that almost any other Republican would support as well. Reducing the size of government, eliminating departments, consolidating them, trying to make them more efficient, trying to ensure that waste, fraud, and abuse are not consuming tax dollars, which Elon Musk's effort is a part of. People are disputing right now whether this is the right way to go about it. But again, from a policy perspective, any other contender for the 2024 Republican nomination would have pledged the same things. And I think given the size of the national debt and the need to reduce the annual federal government budget deficit, this is critical for long-term stability in the United States. And if government's size and costs can be reduced, and if its scope on regulations can be reduced, then that will provide a boost for the economy. And again, the question is whether the tariffs take away a lot of the benefit of the other reforms he wants. Vaccines, to me, are more troubling. I think there's a lot of junk science in what we've seen from the Secretary for Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy Jr. And I think most Americans would like to hear, like to see this question settled, because they're worried primarily about their children. And to say that the usual children's vaccinations are somehow not harmful can cause a lot of damage. We've seen a measles epidemic in Texas, which we haven't seen in decades, because people have not had their children vaccinated. So on that score, I don't think Kennedy's taking the health effort in the right direction. I expect that will be much more controversial, including very much among Republicans.
Definitely. Sir, talking about President Trump's international statements, he talked about taking the Panama Canal back. He offered to take on Canada and Greenland. Also, he stressed on the Venezuela situation, and he also proposed the change of name of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. How do you view these statements and the potential implications for U.S. foreign policy and international relations?
Well, I think a lot of the things you've just mentioned are just ideas that Trump had one afternoon and that he decided to put out in public. Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico is just silly. I mean, it's close to Mexico and it's close to America. We've survived for hundreds of years calling it the Gulf of Mexico. We can probably continue to do so. The problem in Panama has essentially already been resolved. If the Hutchison-Whampoa global ports operation is sold to the consortium that wants to buy it, there is legitimate concern for China having a grip on sensitive port facilities around the world. And as I say, this may have taken care of it. We'll see. But you don't need to use the military to do that. The present president of Panama, very pro-American, wants to work with us on the illegal immigration question. And if Trump had bothered to ask, I'm sure there were people who could have explained this to them. The Canada thing is completely silly. I think he's trolling former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, whom he didn't like very much, calling him Governor Trudeau rather than Prime Minister Trudeau. This is a proposal that has, as far as I can tell, essentially zero support among the American voters. That nobody elected Donald Trump to take over Canada. Greenland is a sensitive issue and has been in America for many years, going back to the 1860s, when William Seward, after purchasing Alaska from Russia, tried to purchase Greenland from Denmark in 1868. But I think if we can take this issue out of the spotlight, work with the government of Denmark, work with the people of Greenland, we can take care of what I think are our legitimate national security concerns, and also the perfectly legitimate interest of the inhabitants of Greenland and the Danish government. So this is Trump, the showman, the TV actor, not a real president.
Talking about the favorite part for many, the tariff war. President Trump initiated a tariff war, citing the need to protect American industries and address trade imbalances. How effective do you believe that tariff war has been a tool for the soft power of military diplomacy for the US, considering its impact on international trade relations and economic outcomes?
Well, I think there are certainly problems in the international trading system, largely caused by China. There are differences we have with almost all of our trading partners. That's, I think, almost inevitable in complex economies. But the way you resolve it is not to declare a general trade war on the rest of the world. I think these policies are economically illiterate, and I think they're going to hurt the United States, hurt our own domestic manufacturers and farmers when other countries retaliate. I hope it doesn't continue down this road of a global trade war. The last time we did this was with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930 that led to a global depression. So trade wars don't make anybody better off. The history is that trade wars make everybody worse off. And I think it's a very ill-advised policy by Trump. And as I say, I hope from domestic political pressure, from constituencies within the Republican Party, we can head this off before it goes too much further. But if we're not successful, I think this is going to have a negative impact on not just the U.S. economy, unfortunately, but economies all around the world.
Definitely. So, sir, President Trump frequently spoke on the Islamist terrorism, characterizing it as a global threat. During a recent visit of Tulsi Gabbard to India, she also raised concern about Islamist terrorism. In light of ongoing counter-terrorism efforts and evolving global threats, how do you assess the current threat of Islamist terrorism and the effectiveness of current strategies to combat it?
Well, I think the threat remains very high. I think the principal source of financial support and advice and direction is Iran. We saw what happened after October 7 when what the Revolutionary Guard calls the Ring of Fire strategy was unleashed against Israel. I think Iran has suffered severe setbacks, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, the punishment that Hamas and Hezbollah have taken from Israel. Today, in past days, particularly now, the attacks against the Houthis in Yemen, who have closed the critical Suez Canal, Red Sea maritime passage. And the real question is whether and when Israel will strike Iran's nuclear weapons program, which is a threat, a proliferation threat, really on a global basis. It's not just Israel's problem, it's everybody's problem. So I think Iran has been dealt some significant setbacks, but the threat still remains. And if at some point the people of Iran were able to take control of the government, remove the Ayatollahs, and install almost any other regime in Tehran, that the source of money and other material assistance to terrorist groups worldwide would drop dramatically. And I think that would greatly facilitate bringing the whole problem under control.
Definitely, sir. So, sir, now talking about the Middle East crisis as we get there, President Trump has expressed a desire to take back the Gaza Strip, while ongoing tensions and recent strikes on the Houthis in Amman, the region remains volatile. What outcomes do you foresee in the Middle East, and what events are likely to unfold in the near future, particularly concerning efforts to stabilize the region and address Israel's security concerns? When might we see a comprehensive resolution to these issues?
Well, as I say, I think you could see a big step toward a resolution of many, if not all, of the issues in the Middle East if Israel goes after Iran's nuclear weapons program. I think that would leave the regime even weaker than it is now, and may give rise to the circumstances where the Iranian people can take control of their government back. I think that the idea that the U.S. is going to take over the Gaza Strip and build a Riviera in the Eastern Mediterranean, those chances are between slim and none. But what I think everybody needs to confront is what to do with the people of Gaza, who for decades were used by the radical Arab states in the 1950s and 1960s as a wedge against Israel to help drive Israel into the sea. That isn't going to happen. But the other idea that you can simply rebuild Gaza as a high-rise refugee camp risks another October 7th down the road. We've got to get serious from a humanitarian point of view of finding other locations where Gazans can go and live. It's not Gaza itself is not an economically viable territory, and ways and means have to be found to give the residents, their children, some kind of future they can look forward to. We've heard reports, and the Arab states in the region have heard reports that of a population of about 2 million in Gaza before the war, perhaps 10% have already relocated to other Arab countries. So there is absorptive capacity, and we want to do this in a fair and humanitarian way. We're not talking about forced relocation, but bring in the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, let that agency deal with the problem, and it won't happen overnight, but that could put us on the road to a real lasting solution.
Okay, sir. So, sir, talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, President Trump proposed a peace plan for the Russia-Ukraine war and met with Zelensky. Given the ongoing nature of conflict, the complexities of the geopolitical alliances, and the significant humanitarian and economic consequences, what do you have to say about the Trump-Zelensky meeting fiasco and the overall situation prevailing in the Russia-Ukraine war? What are your predictions for the outcome and the timeline for resolution, considering the various factors at play? And recently, I have heard a news that they both, President Trump and Zelensky, both have a long call right now. I just got the news. So, sir, what do you have to say on this?
Well, what happened in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelensky was a great disaster for Ukraine and really for Western unity against the Russians. I think it's been repaired in part, but we are still a long way from a resolution to the war. The idea we're going to get a quick ceasefire, even after the discussions between Trump and Putin, and as you say, Trump and Zelensky, I just think they're going to have to be a lot more negotiations because the Ukrainians think they're fighting for their freedom and independence, and they don't want to submit to the Russians. The Russians are trying to recreate their empire. So there's a fundamental gap in the perceptions of the actual combatant parties and what the circumstances are that would lead to a lasting peace. The Ukrainians obviously see that Russia invaded first in 2014, invaded again in 2022. They know what Putin has said about recreating the Russian Empire, and they're very worried that if you had a ceasefire now and just allowed Russia to continue to control 20% of Ukraine's territory, it would simply be a matter of time before there was a third Russian invasion. So how to try and make that impossible is a very difficult problem, particularly if the U.S. is not going to play the role it has played in the past. If it, as it appears under Trump, really switched sides from Ukraine to Russia. Now, we'll see how it plays out. There's still a lot we don't know about either the Trump calls with Putin and Zelensky, and so there may be more to it that we'll find out in the coming weeks.
Definitely, sir. So, while the Middle East crisis and the Russia-Ukraine war are dominating the headlines, tensions in the South China Sea persist, with concerns about China's growing influence. How do you assess the situation there, and what role should the US potentially under a Trump administration play in the region to counter China's influence while maintaining stability?
Well, I think China is a growing threat all along its Indo-Pacific periphery. It's not just a threat against Taiwan. It's now intruding into the airspace and maritime domain of the Japanese home islands, as well as the Senkakus in the South China Sea. It's declared the entire South China Sea a province of China, which would make what are now international waters into Chinese territorial waters. That's totally unacceptable to the United States and to the ASEAN countries that and everybody who depends on commerce through the South China Sea. And we also know that China is making efforts both through submarines and surface ships to gain a significantly increased presence in the Indian Ocean, which has enormous implications, all of them negative. So I think multiple things have to be done. I think it's important to increase communication through the Quad channel, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States. We may want to consider adding other countries to that, maybe South Korea. And I think more concern to the countries of ASEAN before Chinese influence spreads from the South China Sea elsewhere into the region. This is really how to deal with hegemonic China. To me, is the key national security issue for the United States for the rest of the century.
Okay, sir. So, sir, now talking about the Pakistan and India scenario. US at times have reduced or stopped funding aid to Pakistan, which has been labeled as a terrorism producing country. Meanwhile, there's ongoing discussions about India taking back the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, POK. How do you assess the situation in the region, particularly concerning counter-terrorism efforts, and what is your perspective on the timeline and implications of India potentially regaining control of POK?
Well, look, this is a long-standing problem. It's got a lot of historical background to it. I thought we were making progress after 9/11 with the government of Pakistan. They've obviously had difficulties over the past several years. We've got two nuclear powers faced off, but Pakistan and others have to stop the export of terrorism into India. India has a right of self-defense. It's exercised it before, but it's very dangerous territory. And here again, I think China is a major part of the problem. I think it's looking for trouble. It's looking for ways to put pressure on India, sometimes through Pakistan, sometimes elsewhere. I think it's very important in dealing with Pakistan to try and push back on China, to try and there are enough problems to resolve on the subcontinent without China getting involved. So I think this should be a major focus and perhaps something the Quad could work on.
Sir, thank you for your time. We learned a lot from you and wish you to see you soon again on Bharat News. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Take care now.